Hello, everybody. I am Dr. Steve Johnson, and today I want to look at parasuicidal behaviors known as non-suicidal self-injury. These are deliberate actions that are taken by an individual to cause harm, but without having any kind of suicidal intent whatsoever. Um, Often these behaviors are ways for an individual to cope with intense and distressing emotions. So let's just jump right into the subject. Um, I want to look at in this webinar several things, parasuicidal behaviors, and I'm going to look at 9 key behaviors. And I won't spend a lot of time on each one of these. These are to give you an overall feel. In upcoming webinars, I'll go into more deeply into some things, okay? So we're kind of giving an overview of the topic today. So I want to look at parasuicidal behaviors. I want to look at the 8 key behavioral warning signs that are parasuicidal behaviors. And then I'm going to look at issues such as peers and peer influence on parasuicidal behaviors, especially among younger individuals, the role of the media, and then also current social trends in this issue. And then finally, I want to look at steps to take as individuals and as clients and therapists. I want to look at 10 different steps that we can take. And then I want to look at the effective use of REBT and also CBT. In upcoming webinars, I'll look at other models and how they could handle parasuicidal behaviors. Okay, so let's get started. Well, parasuicidal behaviors, and I want to just briefly mention 9 major parasuicidal behaviors. One is cutting. That's using a sharp object to cut the skin, often the wrist or the thighs, somewhere where with clothing you could minimize others seeing that an individual has cut. The second one is kind of burning, using kind of heat sources to cause burns on the skin and intense pain. Often something like cigarettes would be commonly used for that one. Third is self-hitting, punching or hitting the self. A variation on that is pretty common, and that would be head banging or that kind of behavior. Another one be scratching, excessive scratching to cause wounds. Biting, some people will bite oneself to the point of injury. Hair pulling or trichotillomania, pulling out one's hair by the roots, that we often think of the top of the head, but that can be for any part of the body whatsoever. And then deliberate interfering with wound healing, deliberately doing things that would prevent the wound from healing. Another one would be ingesting harmful substances, like swallowing non-food items or toxic substances. Again, the intent in this is not suicidal at all. It is to cause harm to the individual, however. And then overdosing, number 9, without any suicidal intent, taking an excessive amount of medication or drugs without the intention of causing death. Some behavioral warning signs of that we see in parasuicidal behavior are many, but I just want to briefly mention 8 of them. One is, and this is a sign to others that someone may be engaging in parasuicidal behaviors or self-harm. One is if the individual has unexplained injuries, if these are, for example, frequent cuts or bruises or burns or other forms of wounds. 2 would be covering up, like wearing long sleeves to cover up wrist cutting, or even pants, even in hot weather hide to hide injuries. I once had a client who, when he was very distressed, particularly angry, and this person was otherwise very high functioning, very, very well. He had great job, but he would take, a huge knife and cut his thighs, and um, and then wear long pants. But one day he came in, he was wearing shorts to the session, and we had just begun talking about some of his self-injurious behaviors, and he showed me the cuts, and it was. The problem is that some of these, the intent may not be to commit suicide, but they could, for example, nick an artery or something like that. That could cause some major problems and leave scarring, etc. Another one is isolation, withdrawing from friends and family, and even social behaviors that individual like. These are very common behaviors in depression, but also in individuals with parasuicidal, engaging in parasuicidal behaviors. Of course, some of these individuals may be experiencing major depression, but not necessarily so. Emotional distress, any kind of emotional stress, it could be there, could do that. For example, signs of depression. Depression typically has, the individual has an inference of experiencing a major loss that is very important to them. That could be loss of a relationship, loss of health, loss of a job, loss of any number of things, loss of meaning, loss of purpose in life. Or anxiety. The anxiety is a little bit different. In there, the individual has an inference of perceiving threat in the environment, that there is a big threat in the environment, and the individual, kind of withdraws. And one way of withdrawing is to engage in parasuicidal behaviors, or even just emotional instability, highs and lows, and the individual is incapable of managing that emotional instability or the emotional distress. Number 5 is possession of harmful objects, keeping sharp objects in the house, lighters, or other tools that could be used for self-injurious behavior. Another one that is really important, number 6, would be changes in behavior, noticeable shifts or changes in the individual's mood or their behavior or their personality. Often we would say, oh, this individual is not acting like themselves. Now, that happens to all of us. At times we don't seem to act like the normal self and engage in habitual actions that people use to identify us as being ourselves. And so major shifts in that behavior can be a very clear cue. Frequent bandages, for example, wearing bandages or gauze without clear reasons. And another one is, and this one is very important, in that is behavioral secrecy, being very secretive about their actions or their whereabouts. Sometimes this is expressed when we ask them about that, is some kind of vague response about what we are seeing. Okay, I want to shift now to considering the role of peers. And we are just touching on the surface of these topics, and I do hope this spurs people to go and look more deeply into these. And if you need to get help, of course, to get help, but I'll be talking about that later. Peers, one way that peers can have an impact, and this is not exclusively, but very much depending on age. We see this in younger populations, and that age is getting younger and younger. One kind of issue associated with peers is um, um, uh, influence that peers can have on others' behavior through direct encouragement, or often it's not through the encouragement of another person to engage in self-injurious behavior, but they model it. They're engaging in it, and the person who is engaging in the self-injurious behavior sees the other ones. And so this is very, very common among younger people. Support. Peers can provide emotional support and help decrease the distress depending on their actions and their reactions. If they don't react in really negative ways, then they're kind of supporting the behavior. Often they can support it by just keeping it secret. Often, if you're a parent of an individual who is engaging in self-injurious behavior, we can initially be just parents can be just horrified because it seems to be so foreign to their loved one. And so friends and peers may not have that kind of response and may be supported, but in ways that actually maintain the behavior. Not all. Sometimes peers can do a fantastic job of helping someone who's engaging in self-injurious behavior. One is acceptance. An individual may engage in this because of the desire acceptance, and that may lead individuals to engage in parasuicidal behavior so they fit in with a group where individuals within that group are also engaging in such behavior. Another factor that we see here is communication. Of course, peers can either discourage or actually inadvertently normalize these behaviors by discussing them openly. And social media has a role on this one, and I'll be looking at the role of the media in just a few seconds here. But social media, I mean, for example, when I was looking at this over the last few years, I was looking at the presence of parasuicidal behavior on YouTube, and it was unbelievable. Not only parasuicidal, but suicidal behavior. And sometimes the music they played was quite beautiful. They showed wonderful pictures of the individual, etc., and made it almost attractive. I'm sure that was not the intent of the individual, but that can happen. Let's now shift, which leads us to the very next issue that I wanted to look at, and that is the role of the media. Well, of course, one role of the media is exposure. The media coverage of self-injury can lead to, wonderful increased awareness of this kind of behavior, but it also has the potential to support the imitation of such behavior. So that exposure can be a double-edged sword there. Normalization. Social media can normalize self-injurious behavior. The depiction of the self-harm in the media can sometimes inadvertently normalize that behavior. And another real factor that we see social media playing is triggering. Graphic images or detailed descriptions can actually trigger individuals who are otherwise quite vulnerable. It may not be the intent, but the descriptions can be quite triggering. And then resources. The media could be a fantastic resource for getting the word out. Media can also, in other words, provide information about help and resources so the individual who is struggling with the vulnerability and intense emotions that are very difficult for them to control and are engaging in self-injurious behavior to try to manage those. The media can help them become aware of places where they can actually get help. Okay. So the media can play both a positive and a negative role, regardless of the negative one, at least regardless of the intent. Let's look at current social trends, though. One Um, and some are of these social trends are actually intended to help individuals. And we really want to applaud and support that kind of social trend. One, social media is there. Platforms can both spread the awareness, as I've said, and then also inadvertently promote self-harming behavior. And that is one social trend. The rise of the social media is just huge and is largely influential. Or online communities. One thing that we see an increase of is online communities. Some online forums, for example, provide support, while others may encourage harmful behavior. And so those of us who are in education, in media, and social influencers, we can begin to increase presence so that we can try to help support individuals who are engaging in such behavior. The other one, of course, is increased awareness. The growing recognition within about mental health issues in general, aside from parasuicidal behavior, is tremendously important. The stigma of getting social mental health support, while still present and still having deleterious consequences, has lessened to significant degrees over the years. And it also, there's an awareness, a greater awareness in our society for the need to support each other, but individuals today in terms of parasuicidal behavior. And then the other one is cultural acceptance, and that can be kind of a double-edged sword. Varying cultural attitudes towards mental health and self-injury influence the behavior and help seeking. So social media can be, I mean, this is a social trend right now where not only are attitudes changing toward mental health issues in general, but also toward self-injurious behavior. When we realize that when there's a greater awareness that self-injurious behavior is in itself a form of communication, that an individual is in distress, it may be concerning to us, particularly if we have not encountered that before, but we can become aware that it is a key, it is a clue to something that is going on, and then we can act upon that clue rather than whatever emotional response we're having toward that, especially if our emotional response may not be terribly helpful in the moment. So, what do we do about this? What do we do about what are steps that we can take? And each one of these steps can be, we could talk about them endlessly in terms of what we could do with this. And so these are for all of us. Some of them are more for mental health practitioners, but these are important steps that we may be able to to take. Again, this can be for therapists as well as others. One, of course, is to seek professional help. Consult mental health professionals such as psychologists or psychiatrists, or even master's level therapists, marriage and family therapists, licensed professional counselors, etc. Ask about their experience in helping individuals engaging in self-injurious behavior. I always tell my graduate students that if you go on Psychology Today, it can be quite a resource manual, a resource or referral service. It can be quite helpful for identifying, but sometimes it can be quite confusing. For example, if there's a place there where you can list your competencies, and sometimes there's a huge list, and which really puts the burden on an individual to really find out how much experience has the individual had, what kinds of outcomes have they seen among their clients, etc. Ask pointed questions, get information, because you want an individual with a therapist, at least, who has a background in helping individuals with self-injurious behavior, or a psychiatrist to perhaps they can help with making having opinions and informed opinions about whether medication might be warranted in any given particular situation. Engage in therapy. And some of the therapies that allegedly have had wonderful or really great and helpful outcomes are therapies such as second and third wave behavioral models, such as CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, REBT, rational emotive behavioral therapy, and third wave, dialectical behavioral therapy, DBT, or ACT, acceptance and commitment therapy, all wonderful therapies that may be helpful to individuals who are engaging in these kinds of behaviors to help um, you know, moderate their moods and deal with these intense emotional responses. DBT has been found to be quite helpful in individuals with great variability or fluctuations in mood. A third is to build a support system, establish a network of healthy, supportive friends, of family, and support groups. And they're out there. You can find them. Every state has some kind of mental health services or information granting services that let you know where there are support groups so that you can engage it. Some of these support groups are absolutely free, so it is important to do that. Okay. Um, and the other one is to develop coping strategies. This can be done with the help of a talk therapist, right? Some of those therapies that um, give you coping strategies to practice healthier ways to cope with deep, intense, and distressing emotions. But when you do this, always pay close attention to your connection with the therapist. Give therapy a chance, but there are a lot of therapists, and if it doesn't click with one therapist, you can try another one. But don't make an opinion too quickly on that unless it's very clear this isn't going to work out with a therapist. And again, quiz the therapist about their background in this. Another one is to create a safety plan. Identify, and in that safety plan, identify the triggers and develop a plan to either avoid them or manage them. One service that I really like, and you can find this, and there are books on this, and I've had clients do this with me, is what's called the WRAP, WRAP, the Wellness Recovery Action Plan. And it's wonderful. And again, you can do this collaboratively with a mental health professional. Some people do this alone. I think it's nice to do it with an informed mental health professional. And it moves from what are you like when you're not engaging in self-injurious behavior, when things seem to be going well? What are you like when you encounter triggers? What steps would you take at that point? What are you like when you're experience very deep distress? What are steps you can take there? And even list who would be great to have in your life at these different stages of your levels of distress. Okay. So it's called the Wellness Recovery Action Plan. You can find it online. And again, I always think it's a great thing to do in collaboration with an informed licensed mental health professional. Um, Restrict means. This would be number 6. Restrict the means to by removing or limiting access to objects that are used for self-injurious behavior. Sometimes it's nice to have a self-informed accountability partner, so that if you're thinking of accessing means, that you talk to this individual to help you get over the hump, because sometimes it's an impulsive act here. And so if that individual can help you take steps to get that means away, get yourself away from them, that can be quite helpful at times. Another one is to educate and raise awareness, inform peers and educators and communities about parasuicidal behavior and how to support those who are affected. I think those of us who are mental health professionals or organizations that are dedicated to these kinds of issues can do so much to inform individuals, different groups, talk to individuals about what they can do. There was for suicidal behavior, not parasuicidal, but you could do it for both. There's what's called the Yellow Ribbon Program, and they have like cards that an individual has, and on the back of the card, it tells someone else what they can do to help this individual. And the individual who may be really distressed just hands the card over to the individual and tells them to look on the back, and it walks the other individual step by step through things that they can do to help the individual, including call 911 if the individual needs that. Number 8 would be to monitor your consumption of the media. Be mindful of the media. Be mindful of media content that may trigger self-harming behavior, and refrain from that. Be very proactive about the kinds of things that you watch. Um, um, I always tell people, and I'm very open about it, that I've had major depression since I was a young child, and so I monitor the media, and I'm very proactive about that. When I'm in the midst of a major depressive episode or feel one coming on, I will not look at certain forms of certain forms of media that would just make my mood worse. And so it's becoming, it's taking the responsibility of monitoring the media. The number that was 8, and number 9 would be to engage in positive activities. By positive activities, I mean healthy, helpful activities. Engage in, participating in those activities that promote well-being and reduce stress. Some people say, I don't even know what to do. Well, there exists, and for example, at the Albert Ellis Institute in New York City, a great institute that is the international headquarters for Rational Emotive Behavioral Therapy, they even have sheets of all kinds of activities that an individual can engage in. Another place where you can get it is online, I believe, if in a wonderful textbook called Seeking Safety. In Seeking Safety, they have all kinds of activities that an individual can engage in on an experimental basis. We may not know a priori. We may not know before we engage in the behavior whether it's going to be enjoyable, but we don't make a demand that a particular one will, but we try them out, we experiment, and then we see which ones work best for us. Don't demand perfection, but if they can help distract, or if you can find them interesting, helpful, amusing, whatever, then engage in those kinds of activities. And so again, it'll give you all kinds of ideas for doing that. One thing that Albert Ellis said, Dr. Albert Ellis, who is the founder of Rational Emotive Behavioral Therapy, he said it's very helpful for all of us and a sign of mental health, and it supports mental health if we if we have consuming passion. So, for example, I just moved to the country, and I'm a city person, and I love New York City, etc. But I'm really liking the country, and noticed the other day I spent 30 minutes just watching the hummingbirds coming to the hummingbird feeder that I put up. And then when I looked beyond that, there was a rabbit. It looked like a tame rabbit, but it was there. And as it was chewing on the flowers that were outside, all kinds of butterflies around, and it was such a beautiful scene that it just consumed my interest for like 30 minutes, and it was just a wonderful wonderful time. And I think those kinds of things, maybe you don't like nature, maybe that's not your consuming passion, maybe your consuming passion is making music or listening to music or engaging in art or doing some crafts or going to a movie. My wife and I do that, especially when things have been stressful. We love going to a movie. And this is not the great part. We get a huge bucket of popcorn and have them pour a lot of butter on it. And then, the soda that is like, so huge. Of course, I get my diet soda, but still probably not great for me. But that watching that movie and the surround sound and everything is just a wonderful consuming passion for us. So if individuals can experiment with these, you never know which one's going to, never know which one. One consuming passion that I developed is composing music. Never knew that I had the ability, and during COVID, I just did it, and now it's a huge interest of mine. So that's something that we can all engage in and can help us. 10 is regular check-ins. Regular check-ins have us, establish routines to check in with mental health professionals, to monitor our progress, and to adjust interventions as needed. Even if you're working with a counselor, psychologist, whomever, if a certain intervention just means technique. If a certain technique isn't working, then we can try another one to work together. But collaboration with your mental health provider is fantastic. Don't expect them to just hand it to you, or don't think that you have to do the work, but collaborating with an individual can make this really, really, really helpful. So now we want to make a shift, okay? And that is today is to how can we use just one model, REBT, to help in this individual. We don't know before an individual engages in it whether any particular model is necessarily going to work with them, but we want to try to use models that may increase the likelihood of getting help for individuals. And I've already mentioned a number of models that an individual could engage in. So just to get a little background in REBT, there is what is called the ABC model. And the ABC model in REBT it's pretty straightforward. That's why Albert Ellis wanted to make a model that was really, really easy to understand. And so what he did was came up with the ABC model. There are a few more letters in the ABC model. A stands for an activating event. That means something has happened. Typically, it'll be something that the individual experiences as negative. Some people call the activating event an adversity, whatever. B would be beliefs about what that activating event. So the event happens. We have beliefs. Those beliefs may even be habitual. We may have formed those beliefs early in life, and then when something negative happens, those beliefs get triggered, and then the result is C. C would be consequences, and the consequences are emotions, behaviors, and even physiological responses within the body, such as we see when an individual is under stress, right? For example, the elevation in the production of cortisol, the stress hormone, etc. Okay, so A, an event happens. B, an individual has certain beliefs about that event, and C would be the consequences of those beliefs, emotions, behaviors, and even physiological responses. D, as part of it, is what we want to teach clients, or for clients to learn, is disputing. Disputing what? The beliefs. To take those beliefs that are not helpful, to realize the ways in which they're not helpful for you, and then to replace them with beliefs that are going to be most helpful. And so there's this process that the individual goes to, they can learn so that they can dispute it with a counselor, with a therapist, and then hopefully on their own. And so that they've got this new skill that they can engage in to help them. And the result is what we hope is E, effective new kind of emotions and behaviors that are more functional rather than dysfunctional. What we mean by a functional or dysfunctional emotion or behavior is A dysfunctional behavior or emotion are those that tend to get in the way of you attaining your life goals, those goals that you want, short-term goals, long-term goals. And a functional emotion and behavior would be those that help you attain your desired life goals. And those are your goals. They may not be the desired life goals of someone else, but they're your goals. And so this is why when you work with a counselor, it's really important to share with the therapist what your goals are, what your values are. Because your goals are going to be grounded in what values, what are the things that are most important to you in life. Okay. And as a therapist, going through this with clients can be quite helpful. Well, how do we apply this then to parasuicidal behavior? One is if we look at that activating event, we help the client to identify specific situations or events that tend to trigger their self-harming behavior. And very important and sometimes neglected, but I think extremely important. And the only way to get it is for the individual, for the therapist to talk to the individual, is to explore the context in which that self-injurious behavior occurs, such as maybe conflicts with other people might be a context, or when you're stressed out, or you're feeling like you've been rejected by somebody, whatever it is, that would be an activating event. And knowing what that activating event, especially those activating events that tend to be triggering self-injurious behavior. Two, remember, would be beliefs. So we want to uncover those beliefs. We want to work with the client to uncover unhelpful beliefs and thought patterns that are associated with those activating events. As we grow up, we learn, it becomes behavioral, that when something happens, we think this about that. And then we generalize that to other situations when the other situation may be quite different, or the beliefs that you formed may not be the most helpful, but or they may have been helpful when you were really little, but they're not helpful now. For example, let's say you grew up in a system, in a family system where there was great violence, and you learned to be silent. Otherwise, you could be harmed. Now move forward. You're an adult and you're married, and if there's conflict, you may go silent when it might be most helpful for you and your spouse to kind of talk through this, right? So what may be adaptive and helpful at one stage of life may not be adaptive and helpful at another stage in life. So uncovering those unhelpful beliefs that right now are not helping you at this stage in life can be really important. Here are some of those very common unhelpful beliefs that a lot of people have. You're not abnormal. You're not strange. You're not bizarre for holding these beliefs. These are very common beliefs. They just don't happen to be very helpful. They're normal in that sense, normal in the sense that a lot of people have them, but they're just not helpful. One would be, I must be perfect. That's what we call demandingness. And putting demands like that on yourself, they're just not helpful. You can't be perfect no matter what you do. And if you demand that you're perfect and you're not going to be, then you're going to set the stage to beat up on yourself, experience intense emotions. And for some people, that gets manifested as self-injurious behavior. Or I'm utterly worthless. This we call global negative self-rating, to just globally rate yourself as utterly worthless. Nobody is worthless, right? And whatever you choose to use to evaluate yourself as worthless would just be an arbitrary choice. I mean, there are people that choose something and think they're God's gift to humanity when they're just focusing on one thing. There are other behaviors that would say clearly show that you're not God's gift to humanity there, right? So, but this is not helpful. This global negative self-rating sets an individual up for depression, anxiety, and for some individuals, even self-injurious behavior. Or another one is frustration intolerance. I cannot handle this response that I received from somebody else. believing that you can handle that, that somehow you don't have it within yourself to do that, may not be helpful. Now, look, I know that feeling. I know sometimes thinking, this is too much. I can't handle that. But I think if this kind of thought is popping up a lot, it's maybe getting in the way of life. If it's popping up in different domains of life, your personal life, your interpersonal life, your work life, your professional life, your educational life, your recreational life, your spiritual life. If that's popping up there, that may not be really helpful. So talking to someone like a counselor may be quite helpful for you to see that that belief is not really helping you in the long run. Okay, we call that frustration intolerance. By the way, people with high frustration tolerance that can handle it tend to do better in life. That's not to beat up on yourself if your frustration tolerance isn't great around certain things. That can change. That's what counselors are there to do, to try to help you. 3 would be examine the consequences. Discuss with a counselor whatever the emotional and behavioral consequences of holding those unhelpful beliefs, such as what? Um, Believing that you're helpless, believing that you're hopeless, or that the situation is hopeless, experiencing intense anger to the point where it's disrupting relationships, self-loathing, global negative self-rating, anxiety, depression, right? Self-injurious behavior. Explore how those consequences can lead to parasuicidal behavior and harmful ways to cope with the emotional pain. There are other ways that you can learn to cope with emotional pain, and a good therapist can help you with that. 4 would be learn how to dispute those unhelpful beliefs. As as therapists, we can teach clients to challenge and dispute those unhelpful beliefs through a lot of different ways. Okay, there's not just one way. Some are logically based, some are empirically based, and some of those are real pragmatically based. I like beginning with the pragmatic one myself. That's because I find that the clients I've had respond to that most easily, although they may respond to the other ones just as well. We never know which one will be most helpful, or whether a group of them may be helpful to clients. So, for example, encourage clients to consider the evidence that may exist against their unhelpful beliefs, and then to develop more helpful, what we call adaptive, helpful in terms of your behaviors in life. Some techniques are. A logical dispute might be, how does it logically follow that making a mistake makes me utterly worthless? How does that logically follow? Actually, it doesn't. It's not logical. Making a mistake does not mean you're worthless. Making a mistake means you're human. I always tell my clients, what do you call a person who makes numerous mistakes in life? We call them a human. That's what it means to be a human. And we learn through those. That's little kids don't walk around, little tiny kids fall down, mess up, all kinds of things, right? But that's part of the learning. That's a part of the learning. If we see all of this as learning rather as evidence that somehow we are inadequate, that can be very helpful. An empirical dispute would be, what evidence do I have that I am completely incompetent? Am I incompetent in everything? I can't chew gum and walk at the same time? Or am I just choosing certain things that I don't do really well? Well, you can, if you don't do something really well, rather than beating yourself up over it, try to do better on it with the help of somebody. Or if you just end up not being great at that, there's just some things that you're not great at. I am not great about fixing my car. I don't feel inadequate about that. I just take it to a mechanic who has that competency. That that mechanic may not be competent at teaching psychotherapy. I've got those skills, right? I'm not perfect at that, but you know what I mean? So don't use this as an occasion to beat up on the self. And the pragmatic dispute, which is my favorite, and that is, How is believing this, how is holding this belief helping me or to improve my situation? And if it's not, it might be good to change that. And it probably would be good to change it. And then the last part is to develop new beliefs, the effects, the E in the ABCDE model. What we want to do is help the clients and learn ourselves, help the clients to adopt, formulate new, helpful, more realistic, helpful beliefs. Encourage them to adopt beliefs such as, I am a human who makes mistakes. I have value despite my flaws. I have value even if others may think that I'm a failure. You know, I don't live on their love and approval. I can cope with difficult emotions in healthier ways. I may not be perfect at that, but I can do better at that. I can learn how to do that. Okay. And then discuss how these new beliefs can lead to more helpful emotional and behavioral outcomes, reducing the need for self harming, self injurious behaviors as the coping mechanism. Okay. I want to look at some additional strategies here. One is emotional regulation. These are what I would call protective factors. Some people have not grown up with these protective factors. They may have grown up with risk factors, but maybe not some of these protective factors. And you know what? It's never too late to incorporate these protective factors into your life. And that's what a good counselor can help an individual do. And some of these are not always the easiest to learn, but they're worth putting the energy in. One is emotional regulation, is where we teach clients, techniques or interventions to regulate their emotions. Like what? Mindfulness, relaxation exercises, or grounding techniques. It's very, very interesting. When an individual is highly aroused physiologically, it is probably better for us to use grounding exercises because those are done very quickly and it can help bring down the level of distress. However, it is very important when an individual is not so physiologically aroused to learn mindfulness, how to be in the moment without exercising judgment about what's happening in the moment. Um, there's a wonderful value to mindfulness. I'm not going to belabor this because I've done videos on this and you can find those on my YouTube channel, Psychotherapy Education and Training. Okay, there's a commercial. But I have covered this. There are two brain systems. There are lots of brain systems, but there are two that are really interesting and relevant to this. One is called the default mode network, and the other one is called the task positive network. The task positive network is that brain network that is activated when we're engaging in a task, we're focusing on something. Like students, my students, when they're reading the text that I ask, or they read a case that I'm wanting them to analyze, they're engaging in the task positive mode. On the other hand, there's what's called the default mode. This is activated not when we're attending to something, but when we're kind of vegging out. We're sitting on the couch, just letting the mind wander, etc. Both of those are valuable, right? You test positive very clearly. You want to, when you got to get things done in life, that's the mode we want. The default mode network has been shown to be very important for the development of a self-narrative, a story that you have about yourself, the autobiographical memory. That's tremendously important, right? In fact, there are certain conditions when the default mode is under attack where the individual doesn't remember who they are, etc. Okay? And these two work together. And for example, the example I often give is when I'm driving to the university, I may have driven those roads so often that I'm paying attention, but it's like in the background. It's like the elevator music that's going on. And so if you ask me what was going on both sides of me, I may not be really aware. However, and so I'm in the default mode then, right? Um, but if a car comes close to me, I kick into task positive mode, and the task positive mode will help me figure out how I can divert disaster, etc., and a wreck. Okay, so it's very important that we have a balance between these two. When there's overactivation of the default mode, we see an increase in depression, an increase in anxiety, and an increase in all kinds of unhelpful behaviors. So, what we want is a greater balance. Well, guess what? Mindfulness and engaging in mindfulness activities, and go look them up because I don't have time to get into those today. But engaging in mindfulness helps regulate the connection between the default mode network and the task positive network. And we want that balance. We don't want overactivation of one or the other. We want a nice balance. The individuals can flip between the two. Two, problem solving skills. That's a major protective factor. We can work on enhancing an individual's problem solving abilities to deal with stressors and conflicts. And one of the ways is to help um, lower or get rid of the anxiety, lower the depression, etc. Those will help us to be able to think more clearly. And another way is to help the client break down an issue, break down problems into manageable steps, and to consider multiple solutions, not just one solution. Okay. And to do this, we can work together, the client and the counselor, to form short-term goals and longer-term goals. But these short-term goals can be steps that you take to help solve the problem. Third is a tremendously important protective factor, and that is having unconditional self-acceptance. This unconditional self acceptance does not mean that we like everything about what we do. There may be things that we want to change. We may want to change certain ways that we engage with others. There may be, we're not perfect. And so, but unconditional self acceptance is the acceptance of the self as imperfect, right? Acceptance of the self as a valuable human being, regardless of the challenges that we have. Um, my best friend, who's now deceased, he and I developed a technique to help individuals do this. And this one, we we have the self, and then we have the roles of the self. And so you can even draw pictures. You just draw a circle and you put the word self inside that circle. And then the other one is you just make a list over to the side of the circle, just a list of the roles that you have. You know, I have a role as a professor. I have a role as a husband and father and son and citizen, U.S. citizen, all kinds of roles that I have. Some of those are more important to me than other roles. Okay, so what we want to do, what we want to help people learn is just accept the self. Don't beat up on it. Don't evaluate it. Just leave it alone. What we want to do is evaluate our performance within a role based on the goals that we have in that role. So for each role, we come up with a goal, and then we go, am I reaching, is my behavior helping me reach that goal or not helping me? We evaluate that. If it's not helping me, then we develop a plan for improving our behavior. We may need to collaborate with other people to do that, right? For students, it may be to collaborate with the professor. We may be able to help them with that. Or at our university, we have a student success center. Go over there; they'll help you. They'll help you do that. Okay, so that could be a big help there too, right? So but you're not evaluating the self. You're just evaluating your performance within your roles based on the goals that you have within that role. Okay. Another one is social support. Um, Loneliness is a huge problem in the United States. The Center for Disease Control says that it is one of the biggest health hazards that we have in the United States today. They say it's worse than smoking 2 packs of cigarettes. It's worse than have obesity. It's worse than not engaging in exercise. This is serious stuff. And so it's very important for us to have social support so we're not experiencing loneliness. There is research out there in terms of what helps. Sometimes what counselors will do is they'll just give them a list of potential resources. That can help, but we found that that doesn't help maximally. The other one will be to give people social skills training. That may help, but they found also often people who are lonely and disconnected have the social skills. They're not using the social skills. And for the third reason is, and thing to do is to change the unhelpful thinking that you have about engaging with other individuals. Okay. And there can be very negative thought. Oh, people just don't care. Oh, I'm going to be the one that reaches out to everybody. They're not going to want to listen to me. Oh, I'm going to sound like a whiner. Oh, people are going to think I'm. These are unhelpful ways to think that really need to be challenged and changed. Okay. And that has been found to be perhaps the most helpful in overcoming a loneliness and building social support. So, something to look at. There is one model that I really like. It's used for the treatment of substance use disorder and also individuals who have experienced trauma. And that's called Seeking Safety. It was developed by Lisa Najavitz. You can find some of the worksheets from Seeking Safety on the internet. You could also purchase the text Seeking Safety on Amazon. It's a really great one. But they give you not only do you seek social support in the group, but every week you have homework assignments, or she doesn't call them homework assignments, she calls them commitments, where you go out and you connect with other people and other agencies and other groups to find out in what ways you can benefit from them. I love it. It's a great, great model for dealing with that. Okay. And the other thing to do with social support is to discuss the importance of seeking help and support with friends and family and professionals. And then number 5, and the last one that I want to cover there, is homework assignments. You can give them to yourself. You can work on them collaboratively with your counselor. And this is where we encourage the self or our clients to practice maybe disputing the unhelpful thoughts that they have and applying, developing new ones and putting them into practice. It's not all about just changing your thinking. It's also about changing your behavior. The good thing about humans is our thinking, our emotions, and our behaviors are all interconnected. That is wonderful news. That means if we change our thinking, we can change our behavior and change our emotions. If we change our behavior, then we can change our thinking and change our emotions. So make some change, focus on some changes, out of hope, and just see how it goes and do this collaboratively with the people in group, individually, and see whether that's helpful. Oh, and one way, another great homework assignment is just to keep a journal and track the triggers, the thoughts you have, and alternative coping in there. Or track the trigger, the thoughts you had, and then go, and here are some more helpful thoughts I could have had in that situation. And you might even write out, oh, and here are things I could have done in that. Not to beat up on the self, but use this as an occasion of learning. Okay. I'm pretty well done. So I do want to say that by addressing these uh, key features of parasuicidal behavior, becoming aware of that, increasing ways to help individuals to become aware and promote rational, adaptive thought patterns, helpful thought patterns can be helpful, to a great degree in reducing parasuicidal behaviors and to develop healthier ways of coping with emotional distress. We're all going to experience emotional distress at times, but it is about learning ways to deal with those in ways that are going to be more helpful to us in the long run. Okay. This will empower, and as therapists, this will help empower our clients to, again, to take control over their thoughts and emotions and behaviors, leading to more, we hope, more positive and sustainable outcomes. I want to end by saying that at any time, an individual, if you're engaging in parasuicidal behaviors, um, that you feel out of control, you need help, then please consider dialing 911 or the equivalent for wherever you live. There are helplines. You can call the helplines, often anonymously, and and get help through that. Or, go to the nearest hospital emergency room and and do that. Don't don't think that it's hopeless. It's not hopeless. We live at a good point in history where there are more resources to address this issue and other mental health issues. I hope this was helpful and of interest to you. Be aware that I was not treating anybody here. That was not my goal here. This was for educational purposes only, but I hope you found this a helpful education. Stay tuned for other webinars that I may be doing, and I will always post that on my YouTube channel, Psychotherapy Education and Training. Thank you, and have a good day. I'll stay on for a minute or so if people have any questions or comments that they would like to pose. And you can just message me or send a comment. And I do, Mr. Powers, thank you for wishing me a good morning. I appreciate that. Part of what I'm going to do is go out and mow the lawn a little bit later. Um, any other comments, questions? Feel free. Otherwise, have a wonderful day. Goodbye.